So kind of the first question I'd like to tackle a little bit here was one thing that I kind of drew me so much to your comic was kind of its originality, that we've seen stories before of like heroes losing their powers and stuff like that, but we've never really seen a story of like a kid, a young adult, that his entire identity is basically in celebrity, being the superhero, this like, god among men type thing, and then just all of a sudden he's a normal dude. And and I loved that aspect of just like of exploring that. And so it's like, like, how did you come up with that idea? Like, what influenced you?
Well, the real initial just genesis of the idea was I'd been writing on Ben 10 for 3 seasons, and I'd also worked on Max Steel and reboots of these beloved characters, and it's something that they were really awesome characters.
Mhm.
Characters that I'd grown up on were, and I ran into a lot of young adult fans who were 10 when Ben 10 started
Mhm.
15 odd years ago.
Mhm.
And they really loved the idea that the character was aging along with them. And when they were 17, Ben was around 17 and so on. And there was a necessary moment that the both all these parties have to kind of get to, where like, this is a kid show, we're trying to appeal to a specific demographic of kids, so we have to hit the reboot switch and de-age them. And I would run into fans that were a little more vocal about not being happy about that.
Mhm.
It was also funny, sometimes I'd run into people who were working in the business, and they'd say they would go on about, all these fans are so negative and they act so entitled, and I mentioned I worked on this reboot, and they say, all right, your episode's great, but let me tell you about this reboot. And it was just something I couldn't shake, because I'd been in that position as a fan myself before, like a Ninja Turtles reboot or a Power Rangers reboot, and you have something that the characters you have an attachment to, and then you feel like you've been aged out. And I
Mhm.
wondered, well, what would that be like for the character himself,
Mhm.
that type of character? And it kept spiraling in my mind, and I thought it was a really rich metaphor for growing up, for the ups and downs of your life. I think I've run it by a lot of different people, and they respond to it from different angles, about whether it's like child actors, or someone who
Mhm.
maybe like felt they peaked as an athlete
Mhm.
in high school, and then you kind of have to grow up and not feel at certain ways, like not feel as special as you used to. And I thought that was a really rich metaphor. I think this is Andy's plight, even though it's a fantasy story, is going to feel very down to earth and relatable.
Mhm. No, I definitely agree. There was a line that I really liked that I read, that it said, basically that even superheroes can question, their relevance in the world.
Mm,
And I really liked that, because I think that probably, everybody at some point in their life, has questioned, like, how important am I, and what I doing matters, whatever, I think everybody goes through that. And do you think that that people pondering stuff like that and then seeing it in media is like helpful in people reaching their potential, basically, of kind of, of reaching a point where they're questioning, their existence almost, and then using that maybe to find it.
I try not to get a little carried away with that sometimes, because I think like I don't. I always like preface my work by saying I don't write role models,
Hmm.
because I think that starting with flawed characters is always the most interesting to me.
Hmm.
With that said, in this case it felt better to have more of an optimistic message, and with the basic premise of the idea. A lot of what we shared in the previews of the book is really only like the first third, and even after Andy loses his powers and adjusts to being a normal guy, that's really only, as I've been saying, the end is only the beginning,
Hmm.
and there are a lot of twists and turns that are ahead for him. And if I did have a message for the book, it's that I think more people shouldn't count themselves out too early. And I hope that they find that inspiring with Andy's journey. Or you may watch it and find, figure he's an idiot the whole time, and he's got what he's deserved. I mean, I don't. I try not to get too prescriptive with that stuff.
Hmm.
Just because I think, especially when it comes to superheroes, sometimes always there's a degree of metaphor and fantasy to it that I think starts to lose a lot of its magic and gets a little kind of confusing the more you try to equate it too directly to the real world,
Mhm.
because obviously, you don't want vigilantes going out there and taking the law into their hands.
Uh,
So there is there's always a degree of fantasy with it, that I think it's important to maintain. But I also hope that when people read it, they'll find that the journey that Andy goes on is going to be something that they can relate to, and also the fact that they might find it inspiring or uplifting or encouraging to see that he goes through some lows in his life and finds some new opportunities, even when he thinks he's reached rock bottom.
mm-hmm. Man, that's cool. And that actually ties into my next question a little bit, that when I was looking at it and stuff, that it kind of it struck me about how, like, nowadays, with storytelling, and it's not even a new phenomenon, because we've seen it all the way back with the Arthurian tales too, about kind of like the deconstruction of heroes, and like you said, looking at exploring flaws within mythic characters, whether good or bad, the good or bad heroes. And do you think that what do you think it is that draws people to deconstruction? Because we've seen that with Logan, we've seen it with The
Right.
Last Jedi, we've seen it with a lot of things.
Well, I was inspired by this, that I'd been working in animation for a few years, and I had a show actually in development at Cartoon Network, that wound up being a victim of the merger with Warner Brothers. It was a casualty of that, and I sort of had a moment after that of like trying to reconnect with what had inspired me to get into this business in the first place, and it was a lot of comics that were deconstructionists, weirdly enough. Like, that was actually more my entry point to comics, was things like Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, Astro City, The Death of Captain Marvel. I wouldn't say it's quite as deconstructionist, but books like that had taking more characters that had been initially designed with primarily for children, and finding more mature angles on them. And I think it's interesting too, because in a previous life, I ran an anime magazine, and what I started to find from, I reviewed probably like 1,000 episodes, and what I found from doing that was, it seems like almost every adventure fiction genre or field or what have you almost has like stages of development itself. Like I think about something like the 8 stages of man, right, in psychology, but it's like, there's an earnest stage, then there's a little more mature stage, then there's a bit of the deconstructionist stage, and there's the reconstructionist phase. So what was interesting to me was there was a lot of like really good shows in anime, like Evangelion, which was kind of a deconstruction of mecha shows. Like, there were certainly much more earnest mecha shows prior to that. There was a show called Madoka Magica that I thought was great, that was a deconstruction of Sailor Moon. And I started to like ask around, and what I noticed as well was that there had been a whole series of novels in the 70s that this really great author Philip Jose Farmer wrote about, trying to deconstruct Doc Savage and Tarzan. Like, he would write autobiographies of both characters and trying to make them work more in reality. So I think it's totally natural that if there are characters or archetypes or genres that have captured your imagination, and they'll never let go, and as you get older, you really start to have more grown-up questions to ask about that, or areas you wanted to go in. So I mean, and the list would really go on. I mean, I think that I've seen, George Martin would talk about how Lord of the Rings, he loved the novels as a kid, but then when he got older, he asked more serious questions of like, well, what would ruling wisely and well as a king be like for Aragorn? And he concluded, well, he wouldn't survive as a king, actually, because, and that was kind of the impetus for the Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones.
I never knew that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, he's not really that secretive about it in interviews. Like, if you look it up, then there's actually like a lot of like one-to-one parallels in that series to certain characters. Like the White Walkers, they're kind of a more dehumanized orcs, because the wildlings are a more humanized orcs, because it's sort of like a question, if you're watching, or if you're watching or reading Lord of the Rings, it's like, well, what happens to all the orcs after Sauron's defeated? It's a lot of that. And I thought a similar what was interesting to me about the shows that I'd worked on or the brands that I've been working on is that it was a new generation of heroes that are part of a lineage of superheroes, but also are unique unto themselves. They don't necessarily wear capes and tights to look like circus strongmen. They might wear a really signature t-shirt and cargo pants, or a more practical suit that looks more like a frogman's outfit. Like it's like when you see a lot of these superhero films that get made and they're based off of comics that the characters were wearing skin tight tights. They were wearing spandex before, but then they make the movie and they really emphasize the texture and they try to have more rugged fabrics and have some more practicality to it, right?
Exactly.
And so that was something that I think there was very much I was very intrigued with, well, what would be writing a story that might appeal to a young adult fan or an older fan of this type of character, because time marches on faster than you can keep up with, and that's an audience that has maybe this is looking for more grown-up concerns in the same way that I might have on, say, like Captain Marvel or Superman.
No, that's fascinating, man. With your, creating, like, you were saying, like creating a world and like all these characters and everything, this book has, quite an impressive, guest artist, roster, and Niko is awesome and everything. How does it feel, kind of seeing your creations kind of come to life when you see their drawings?
Oh, very surreal. It was definitely it's a part of the process that I'll never get over, because it's so crazy to have just the figment of your imagination start to become realer in steps, whether it's Niko's his interpretation of it in the book, and then you get the guest artists involved and they do their takes on it, and then the next step is then getting it out in the world and seeing how readers respond to it who weren't involved in the production. I really wanted to I had a guest list, or I had a wish list of guest artists that I wanted to just work with on anything, and it was the right project to bring them involved with. Um, excuse me. I think I can mention that I was basically my own editor on this. So I definitely learned a lot more of the practicalities of being an editor and trying to get people on the same, literally on the same page, because we have 10 artists, actually 12 guest artists when you factor in the variant covers that are all working from different countries, and we're trying to get them on model with characters that aren't even been really set as a model yet. So it was a lot of like communication and trying to say, no, this is this is how Andy's sleeve is supposed to look, or and it was very crucial to I was very lucky to work with some colorists on this, like Ava De La Cruz, who was really crucial to making that consistent, because even though we had a range of guest artists in that feature, she kept a level of consistency. It was a very specific balance that we were going for, where we wanted to have different interpretations of the character, but still make it identifiably Andy and fit the feel of the book.
It makes a lot of sense, man. Now this book was described as like a comic one shot.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could describe what that is for maybe some of our viewers who haven't heard that term before.
Well, yeah, it's wow, my tongue's tied now about it. I guess it's there's certain terms in comics that I think I get like so used to, and you don't realize after a while that it's it's not as like common parlance outside of like comic circles. So it just means self-contained. I've kind of flirted with calling it a graphic novella, because it's 48 pages, so it's about the length, a little longer than say 2 issues.
Okay.
Although we have like that companion piece that's in it that I'd say is a pretty sizable amount of content as well. And what I wanted to do with this was going back to those books that inspired me. What I liked about them was that they were self-contained. They weren't extended prologues. So I think that's a pitfall that people run into a lot of times, where you do have a big world you want to build and characters that you want to be compelling, but instead of doing your due diligence by telling a complete story with an arc and a beginning, middle, and end, you do an extended prologue. And you get carried away with saving the good stuff for later, setting up payoffs that maybe never come because you don't get to do those successive volumes. Maybe the pacing isn't as tight as it should be because you're banking on there being more. So with this, it's a self-contained story. My hope is that we've really made it deep enough that when people do rereads, they'll find more and more intrigue with each successive revisit. And as what I've said to everybody is that if we wanted to do sequels or follow-ups, it's very, very easy to do, but I didn't want to bank on that. So there was very much going into this is that this is our one shot.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, that's very cool. That's good to know. Okay, now with the it's going to be published through Zoop, which is obviously a very exciting, cool new publisher, I guess you could say. I chatted with the guys from Slow City Blues about it, and it was pretty cool. So like, how did your book come to be with them?
Kind of convoluted circumstances. It was just I think the first point was that the project I was on, we've been planning it for like successive seasons, and I've been developing it for almost 3 years, and that got done, and I just really wanted to get back to basics as a storyteller, telling a story to an audience, and not having a lot of boards in between of executives that had to sign off on something before you have this really great idea you want to share with people. So I really just wanted to simply tell a story and get it to an audience and in the format that I wanted it in. And the thing about one shots, because I've had plenty of experience with comics as well, is they don't really fit into like independent publishers publishing brackets, really. Like they want you to make it a mini series that'll eventually be collected as an oversized graphic novel, and that was just not the story I wanted to do. I really wanted to make it a one shot, so it made more sense to go directly to readers. And we were initially thinking of doing it on Kickstarter, and I had been speaking with Camilla Zhang, who was there, and it just sometimes these projects take a long time to come together. And by the time I went back to talk with her, she'd actually moved on and was at consulting with this company Zoop, and was trying to there had been a real just a surge, I guess, of comics on Kickstarter, but they felt that Kickstarter wasn't really tuned. A lot of these things, like they kind of it takes too long for them to adjust to a market. So there were certain, what they call pain points, I guess was the term that they used a lot, was just, it didn't allow for people to buy multiple copies of the book. It also didn't factor in campaign management and fulfillment on the end of the creators, which is incredibly time consuming when you want to be focused on making a book. So this was all pitched to me when I was talking with Eric and Jordan at the company, and they were what really convinced me to work with them was that they understood the book. Because it's a little bit, I think there's definitely some familiar touch points with it, but it's also that touchstones, but it's also something that it's by design was supposed to be something novel and a little out of left field, and they totally understood what I was going for and what the comparisons were and what we were trying to do. So it just made sense, and right place, right time. I think I've definitely found from everybody I've talked to, and I did a lot of research about crowdfunding campaigns, it's just that the management and the fulfillment is a completely different job, and it will take over your life. So and it's something that it made a lot more sense that they'd run some really successful Kickstarter campaigns and had been applying their knowledge of it to this, and it allows me more time to do what I'm good at, which is hopefully making good comics, and allows them to do what they're good at, which is managing a campaign and getting the books to people when it comes time for fulfillment.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, what would you say to, any advice or any statements for people who, writers who are trying to break into the comic world? Do you have any advice that you would give them?
Geez. It's
Oh,
I'm trying to think of like, it's funny because I'm trying to find like something that's good but
uh,
not like too. It's like there's a lot of rote advice too that I think it's given out, like, write what you know. What I would probably say in regard to this is maybe give yourself permission to do the type of stories you want to do.
mm-hmm.
Because I run into a lot of creators that I think are somehow embarrassed about their inspirations.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like a weird psychology, but it's something I've run into a lot of times. Or you really I always like tell people, like, what's your, or ask people like, what's your golden ticket project?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, if you got your wish and you got to do the type of story you want to do, what would it be? And I think a lot of times that, and I've been guilty of this myself and with some past projects, is that you really just overthink things. And it's like, I want to show my range, or I feel too cool to kind of get to the things that I really want to do. And I think the more honest you are about what you like
Mm-hmm.
is going to be better for the product by the end. Because it's, I think the real barometer of any of this is that if it's a story that you like, or the qualities of it that you like, there's a good chance there's going to be other people out there who respond to it, rather than second guessing yourself trying to appeal to someone who's a hypothetical reader.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes a lot of
Um,
sense. Mm-hmm.
so I guess I have a whole lot of other advice. I mean, I actually, one of the rewards is like a writing class, because I've taught for UCLA Extension, and I've also taught for like the Scriptwriter Network. So
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely plenty of tips. But I think specific to comics, that's something that I would uh, maybe it's something I've run into like a fair amount in comics. I guess I would say that seems like a blockage for some people.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that you really want to think hard about what stories you like and what inspired you and why you got interested in comics in the first place, and which ones you'd like to tell, and give yourself permission to do it.
That's great advice. Oh, and well, where can our readers find a copy of your book, and where can they find you online?
So it's an interesting domain. It's zoop.gg. So zoop.gg. And I'm on like Twitter. It's like at Tom Pinchuk. Although I recently started a newsletter, which is really my preferred way of conducting myself online lately. I don't know. I think that what I like about a newsletter is it allows me for more like kind of thoughtful statements. It's really more. It's not like bite-sized little sound bites. It's really more. I get to talk about inspirations that I've had for stories, or what I'm things that are going on in my writing career. I also talk about books that I like in greater depth, and I'll get also into more writing advice as well. And what's been neat is I have had some fans that have submitted questions that I then will answer in my like letter column there.
Cool.
So it was just I take stock of a lot of times about time management as a writer, which is always like the biggest enemy. And I suppose I could have done I could have given a bit of advice about that. um but I just found the newsletter just worked better for me. Like I have a good session, and then I work it on the newsletter, and it's like I'll still be, I am still on Twitter, but I really just use that more as just like if I've posting links of what I'm working on, or things that I have coming out. So I do have a presence on there, but I think that the more meaningful presence is in the newsletter, which is the Chuck Chronicles.
Yeah.
So it's just my name. It's just CHUK Chronicles. If you look that up, you should be able to find it. So
Awesome. Okay.
that's where I am.
Okay, yeah, we'll put a link in that in the article with the video.
Fantastic.
Man, well, I appreciate your time very much. I appreciate you sharing your inside information and your passion with this book. So I'm very happy we were able to talk with you, and I'm glad that we can do our small part in advertising it.
Well, thanks for having me. I mean, like I said, it always means a lot to me that if seeing people respond to it and understand what we've been going after, and it's that's the biggest thrill as a writer. So that's really that's what you're always reaching for. So it's my pleasure to be here, talk about you with the talk with you about the book.
Oh, I'm
Yes.
very happy. Yeah, and hopefully, maybe again we'll talk again, about the book or even other subjects of your career. So,
Yeah, yeah. I've got more stuff coming out. I got that newsletter. That's going to be the place I'll be talking about them. But the hope is, like I said, we if we don't necessarily do a follow up to Andy Xenon, I have more comics in the works with Nikos and with other creators that I'm going to be putting out in one way or another coming up. So keep a lookout for that.
Oh, awesome. We will, man. Well, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Likewise.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of your weekend.
You too. Take care.